Looking at our next body system, we're going to go into the energy systems. Now, the energy systems is what's going to supply our level of ATP. When we talk about how our muscles contract, that ATP is resynthesized from different forms of energy which we consume or is stored within the body. Energy is categorized as what we use and what we eat, and it's broken down into those carbohydrates and fats and proteins that we talked about earlier. Now, carbohydrates are stored within the muscles and the liver cells, and its form is called glycogen. Now, when we eat any form of carbohydrate, whether it's rice, pasta, or sweets or fruit, it gets broken down into glycogen, where it's then transported to wherever it needs to go. Like we said, fructose gets transported to the liver cells, as that's the only place it's going to go, whereas the others are going to get transported to the muscle tissue, where it will be stored. Fat is stored as adipose tissue. Sometimes you can get fat molecules and a slight storage within the intramuscular cell wall in your muscles. However, you don't get that a lot. Majority of our fat is stored as adipose tissue or visceral fat, which you can actually see, and it's got a yellow substancey look. Protein, used as a building material for growth and repair, can also get stored as our muscles. That's what if you think about what that steak is or what that chicken breast is, that is a muscle from an animal. Now, if we look at our muscles, which are protein, they're the same thing. The process of how we get energy and how food turns into that energy source is what we're going to go through next. So when we consume food, it goes through our digestion, it gets absorbed into the blood and transported through active cells, and it's going to get used immediately. Or if we break it down into carbohydrates, fat and protein of what they happen to do, carbohydrates get broken down into glucose, stored as glycogen, and then it is then used when needed to resynthesize ATP. Carbohydrates generally will be used first as the most easiest and quickest energy source for our body to then use to resynthesize that ATP. When we consume fats, it's get broken down and digested through amylase into fatty acids. Those fatty acids get stored as adipose tissue. A small percentage gets stored as intramuscular fat cells, and then that gets used to resynthesize ATP, which is called lipolysis. When we consume proteins, like we said, the chicken breasts or the steak and those meats or dairy and some things like that, it gets digested and broken down into amino acids. Now, amino acids are broken down into non-essential and essential, which we're going to go through later. Those amino acids then get absorbed and used as your body for growth and repair of tissue. If it's not used for that growth and repair, it then gets stored as adipose tissue. Protein can also be used to resynthesize ATP, but it's the body's last resort. And that's what we think about when we look at really malnourished people. They've got very skinny bones and muscles because the body has had to use that muscle tissue to reform ATP to then move. When we think about ATP, is what is the active energy source that contracts muscle tissue. We need to learn what ATP stands for and what it is as a cellular molecular level. So if we break the word down, adenosine triphosphate and ATP, we look at the first letter, adenosine. What is adenosine? So adenosine is ribose and adenine compacted together, which forms adenosine. Triphosphate is 3 phosphate molecules, which become tri, meaning 3. When we put that adenosine and triphosphate together, it becomes adenosine triphosphate. If we remove a phosphate out of that cell, it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. And that's going to happen over time when we think about how ATP is used as an energy source, because then we have the restructuring of adenosine triphosphate because the body is going to use phosphate molecules for the contraction. Different contractions are going to use more phosphate molecules than others, leaving spare ones to then be picked up and resynthesized. Looking at the energy systems and breaking it down into periodic times, the first 15 seconds of any exercise is going to use the phosphocreatine system. So phosphocreatine, if we break that word down, phospho, which is phosphate, and we talk about ATP, triphosphate, the phosphate molecule that gets used within creatine, which is actually stored within those muscles, is used anaerobically, so without oxygen, because it is the first initial response to any activity that we do. Once we've gone through that process of using phosphocreatine, it then needs to resynthesize and ATP will be used. The next energy system that we think about as the byproduct of phosphocreatine being used is lactic acid. Now, lactic acid can be used as an energy source between 30 to 40 seconds of high intensity activity. It's short and sharp, and it's anaerobic as well, because our body has not had the chance to take on oxygen within the muscle to be used in that way. The energy is supplied by glycogen. So what we call is the anaerobic glycolysis, or anaerobic glycogen, is formed by lactic acid systems. The aerobic system is broken down into using glycogen and fat. Now those systems are called different things, where we call aerobic is oxygen, and glycogen, we call it aerobic glycolysis, the use of oxygen and glycogen. Now if we think about the fat that we use over a longer period of time, once glycogen has been depleted, we go through a cycle called lipolysis. And that is the oxidation of our fat cells. So the mitochondria within fat cells is now absorbing and oxidating that fat to be used as an energy source to resynthesize ATP. It is a very slow process, and that is why it's left till last, and it takes a long time to break down those fat cells. So if we think about how we want to lose weight for our clients, we need to go through and increase that fat oxidization and deplete glycogen as the first energy source to use, so that then our client is then going to use fat as a source of energy for activity.